Bachelard begins the Poetics of Space with the objective of his philosophical endeavor, or rather, the logical fallout of his earlier work on epistemology, that science should inflect its language, create the conditions of philosophical endeavor, always be embracing the supple character of the universe, of newness, difference, and to see things poetically. He opens with a philosopher who has involved his entire thinking from the fundamental themes of philosophy of science and followed the main line of the active, growing rationalism of contemporary science as closely as he could, must forget his learning and break with all his habits of philosophical research if he wants to study the problems posed by the poetic imagination. For here, the cultural past doesn't count. One must be receptive to the image at the moment it appears. The theme that continually comes around in Bachelard, perhaps it is even his thesis, is that without the house, man would be a dispersed being. It maintains him through the storms of the heavens and through those of life. It is body and soul. It is a human being's first world. Before he is cast out into the world, man is laid into the cradle of the house. We are born into the home. We are raised in the home. One must chew on the meaning of cast into the world in order to ingest its poetic value as being cast out. That is to say, thrown out, outside the being of the house, a circumstance in which the hostility of men in the universe accumulates. Cooperation between psychoanalysis and phenomenology must be stressed if we are to dominate the human phenomenon. The Poetics of Space is a study into the phenomenology of the home. That is to say, the human experience of the home. Inhabited space, says Bachelard, transcends geometric space. For our house is the corner of the world. As it has been said, it is our universe, a real cosmos in every sense of the word. Where other work on the home concern themselves with describing the home, Bachelard wants to study its primitiveness, for the home is at its most basic element in the human experience, a shelter. Hence it would make sense to study the house as a shell, a nest, a nook, within the simulacra of shelter images. Philosophers have hitherto tried to explain man in the universe as an I, a subject, amongst a universe of non-I, of noumenal objects. Bachelard would remind philosophers that it is the house which turns man into the non-I, and it is only amongst his peers, the objects of the universe, where man is I. Thus, the house is an analogy of man, its interior his soul, its exterior the flesh that protects his vitality. The house offers us a glimpse at the heart of man. Bachelard's work will be that of topoanalysis, the systematic psychological study of intimate space. Intimate because the space of our homes is a personal and private one. They are places of solitude and of dreaming. What other place in the world furnishes itself with the items that make us dream? Homes are filled with ornaic items and poetic spaces. Is not the basement the place of fear, the place of a great deal of our nightmares? Is it not in the attic, which is also the head of the house, where we place our memories and hide our sins? In the attic, fears are easily rationalized, as opposed to the cellar, where our fears are mysterious and more encumbered. We always go down the one that leads to the cellar, and it is in this going down that we remember, that characterizes its ornaicism. Even when we carry a light, we see shadows dancing on the dark walls. When we dream of the cellar, we are in harmony with the irrationality of the depths. For it is in the cellar where the buried madness and all the acts of what we call deviant reside. But in the cellar, we also find the undergrounds of a legendary fortified castle. Is not the cellar a cluster of roots for the house? In contrast, when one proceeds up to the attic, its stairs are more primitive, probably because it leads to a more tranquil place than the cellar. Topoanalysis is not limited to the dimensions of physical space. It cuts across space. It speaks to an analogy of space at the ontological level. Humans, after all, possess a space that is at least native. The mind is a place, because it is where one hides his thoughts. Does not the space of the extroverted, introverted binary pose as an object for psychological inquiry? Is that space not at one at the same time, one which is materially manifest and fundamentally hidden in the space of its being? Likewise, when one reads a room, like the one where we were raised, where one dreams, sleeps, and seeks solitude to retire their exhausted soul. This is the place of analysis that Bachelard will seek to illustrate as a map and as a blueprint. For what we are dealing with here is our reverie. Bachelard says, the reader who is reading a room leaves off reading and starts to think of someplace in his own past. You would like to tell me everything about your room. But over and beyond our memories, the house we were born in is physically inscribed in us. It is a group of organic habits. After 20 years, in spite of all the other anonymous stairways, we could recapture the reflexes of that first stairway, and we would not stumble on that rather high step. The house's entire being would open up, faithful to our own being. We would push the door that creaks with the same gesture. We would find our way in the dark to the distant attic, the feel of the tiniest latch remaining in our hands. Memory is inscribed along the body. Topo analysis moves between the unity of image and memory and the functional composite of imagination and memory. The positivity of psychological history and geography cannot serve as a touchstone for determining the real being of our childhood, for the child is certainly greater in reality. In order to sense across the years our attachment for the house we were born in, dream is more powerful to us than thought. Metropolitan spaces are poverty-stricken with a lack of intimate spaces. Bachelard places critical importance on this when he tells us, in Paris, there are no houses, and the inhabitants of the big city lived in superimposed boxes, every box a conventional hole with no verticality or space to breathe. These buildings have none of the roots of a house, for there are no cellars in skyscrapers. Elevators do away with the heroism of stair climbing so that there is no longer any virtue in living up near the sky. Home has become mere horizontality. The different rooms that compose living quarters, jammed into one floor, all lack one of the fundamental principles for distinguishing and classifying the values of intimacy. Further, there is no meditating space. Everything becomes mechanistic, and on every side, intimate living flees. The streets are like pipes into which men are sucked up. Such is the city dweller's fate. The perpetual sound of city noises, of cars and trucks, sirens and trains, the looping automated voices and the echoes of nightlife pollute the soundscape and make the tranquility of silence impossible. It is here that Bachelard finds recourse in poetry. I recover my calm by living in the meta-glamorous sea, and it has been said countless times that, in the heart of night in Paris, one hears the ceaseless murmur of flood and tide. So I make a sincere image out of these hackneyed ones, an image that is as much my own as though myself had invented it, in line with my gentle mania for always believing I am the subject of what I am thinking. If the hum of cars becomes more painful, I do my best to discover in it the roll of a thunder that speaks to me and scowls me. And I feel sorry for myself. So there you are, an unhappy philosopher, caught up again by the storms of life. I dream, an abstract daydream. My bed is a small boat lost at sea. That sudden whistling is the wind in my sails. On every side, the air is filled with the sound of furious claxons. I talk to myself, to give myself cheer. There now, your skiff is holding its own. You are safe in your stone boat. Sleep, in spite of the storm. Sleep in the storm. Sleep in your own courage. Happy to be a man who is assailed by wind and wave. And I fall asleep, lulled by the noise of Paris. If one is to listen, to see, to imagine, to think poetically, then one will find in the Poetics of space a remarkably magical place.